Let me show you how I test injectors on the N54 engine. I suspect that my injector number 3 may be faulty, so I want to pull that injector out and test it. And I've got another one potentially to go in, and I want to test this one of course before I put it in. So the process to test them, first thing to do is to get the engine cover off, the vanity cover, remove that. And unless you're just doing injectors 1 and 2, you need to remove the stock airbox to be able to test 3, 4, 5 and 6. I've got the dual cone intakes in at the moment, so that's not a problem. But if you have the stock airbox, now's time to remove it. We're going to be operating with the ignition on for extended periods, so strongly recommend connecting up a battery charger or battery tender while we do this. Locate your fuse panel. In my car, right-hand drive E89 Z4. It's passenger side on a hinge setup, folds down like so. Find your little card that tells you which fuse is which, and we need to find the fuel system fuse. There's a picture of a fuel bowser there, fuse number 70, that's the one we're looking for. Turn this map over somewhere here, gives us a legend of where all the fuses are. I've already identified it. It's this little yellow fuse here with the little red dots I've painted on the end of it. A little 20 amp fuse there on my car, might be different on yours. Pull that fuse out. Now we're going to start the car to use up the excess fuel in the system. Just going to stalled a lot quicker than I anticipated. Try starting again. No, there we go. Now if you have MHD or some other scan tool, a way of checking the rail pressure, now's a good time to check, just for safety's sake. Here we have about 10 psi in the rail, which is quite low. If you had a higher pressure, you have a few options. You can either crank the engine a bit more to reduce it, or you can leave it for a while and it will gradually reduce over time. Or alternatively, you can use some rags to put over the connections when you crack the line, just to ensure you don't get sprayed with fuel. I'll take a rag and push it in under the line there. Be careful of your wires, not to damage them. Then a 14mm spanner and carefully crack the line. Very gently do it. You'll see a bit of fuel there dribbling out. Just want to make sure you don't get squirted in the eyes. There we go. So we'll loosen that off. Now I'll come over the other side and back that one off a little bit. And now it's loose. Now go ahead and remove that line to between the rail and injector number 3. Take the line and just turn it around and connect it back on. The same end that was on the rail is connecting back onto the rail with the line sticking up in the air like that. And tighten it up. Now I'm going to start by testing this second-hand injector here before I take my injector out. So that's injector number 3. It's still there. I haven't touched it. I've just put this injector onto the rail or onto this this little branch here and tightened it up. Be careful not to bend this fuel line. So hold the injector while you're tightening the nut up. But all of that is tightened up. And this might be how you want to test a second-hand injector that you have bought from somebody, or are going to buy somebody, or are going to sell to somebody. Because you want to make sure that before you put an injector in that it actually doesn't have any major issues. Before we test it, important step, we need to disconnect the coils to all the plugs so that the engine has no chance of running. So we'll go ahead and disconnect all of those. Now it's optional whether you want to take the coils and plugs out. If you're doing lots of injectors, it's definitely better for your battery to do that, as the engine turns over a lot quicker, and I think you can probably achieve maybe slightly more consistent higher pressure by taking the plugs and coils out. Now reinstall your fuel system fuse so that we can get some fuel pressure built up to test the injector. Now crank the engine. It won't start. Now if you've got MHD, you can check the fuel pressure on there. And here's what it looks like on MHD. There we go, and you can see the pressures, the rail pressures going all the way up to 2000 psi. As soon as I stop cranking, it drops back down again. But we can get to 2000 psi for testing these injectors. Do the cranking process a few times, leaving it a little bit between each run. So leaving it 30 seconds, and we've done that a few times now. If you've got somebody with you, they can check for obvious leaks, but it's the very small leaks that will be harder to spot. So I've got a bright light here to shine up on the injector while I'm doing it. But keep in mind, there's no electrical connection here, so this has got 2000 psi being trying to push into it, and without any control on it, it should be closed. So we shouldn't get any fuel coming out of the end of this injector. So we're not completely testing it. We're not testing the spray pattern or that it even actually operates, but we are testing that whether or not it leaks, and that's normally how these injectors fail. Now, on the very tip of the injector here, this one is leaking. So after 2 or 3 cranks and leaving it a bit between, it becomes a bit more obvious. So it's just on the end here where I wipe. So if I wipe that, do you see very hard to detect with the camera, but you see the wet patch form again. So I'll wipe it just there, and there's fuel coming out. So this injector has a very, very slight leak. Just a very small amount, wipe it, and it goes, there you go, tiny amount of fuel coming out there, and this is at about 150 psi. So I've done the cranking, it's just the residual pressure, and I can see now that fuel coming out. Before I open the fuel system to remove that injector, I need to take the fuse out again. So it pays to have that accessible. Now we can crank the car. Now we're still not going to start it, coils are disconnected, but we'll crank it with the fuse out, and that will hopefully bleed off some of the pressure. There we go. You can check it on MHD if you like. It's pretty hard to get it down under 50 psi without running the engine, but you want to do that cranking process at least once or twice. Now, I can't do this one-handed, but I'll undo this line. I'll wrap a rag around there just to protect myself from any fuel pressure as I gently crack that nut. So my first injector was leaking, unfortunately, at the tip there very slowly. So I've got another injector out of the cupboard, second-hand one, put it in, connected it up, put the fuse back in, and been cranking it. Now I do leave about 30 seconds to a minute between each little cranking session, 3 to 4 cranking sessions, and part of the reason for that delay is to ensure that there's time for any air in this line to purge out through the leaky end. If it is going to leak, it's initially going to leak air, which you're not going to see, and so you want to give it some time to build up continuous pressure over a long period to see if then you get any liquid leaking out of the end. But this one is fine. It's this injector's good to go. So I've still got injector number 3 in there. We're going to pull that out shortly, but at least I know I've got a replacement to go in if I need it. Now, if you are testing more than one injector, there is a better way of doing it, and that is just disconnect as many lines as injectors that you want to test and have them all sitting side by side up here, one after the other, and test the whole lot at the same time. In fact, if you have 6 injectors to test, that's a much better way of doing it, because you're not washing fuel across your pistons and in your bores during that cranking process when the engine isn't running. So there's not really any chance of hydrolocking your engine doing this, but not ideal to have fuel being sprayed in your engine without being burnt. So yeah, if you're going to test a lot of them, I'd line them all up side by side. Alternatively, to stop the injectors from spraying, you can disconnect the plugs to them, to each injector, to stop them spraying fuel into the cylinders. This is our test injector, or second-hand injector that passed the test, so I'll put that aside. Now I want to remove injector number 3. So start that process to remove it. got the electrical line here. Now there's a connector, and we need to pass a screwdriver down the back side of it, on the back side of the connector. So on all the connectors, it's the part that's closest to the cabin of the car, and it's basically this little plastic tab with a hole in it. Just going to push that back a little bit and then pull on the plug to remove the connector. There's the connector removed for injector number 3. It's out of the way. Now, not for every injector, but for this one, these earth leads running across the top of it, and I don't want to damage them. So I've loosened this nut here. We're going to take off that nut and remove this earth lead to give us a bit more space to take the injector out. The wire's out of the way, it's given a bit more space to this injector number 3. The last thing you want to do is pull these out sideways. They need to come out perfectly vertical to preserve the hole, the integrity of the shape of the hole. So get everything out of the way if you need to. Now there's an E10 Torx bit, or E10 external Torx down there. So we're going to take that bolt out. That holds that silver rail there, holds that in place. That holds injectors 3 and 4 in place. So each holds 2 injectors in, so we need 3 out, so we'll take this off. These pieces are removed, and that means that all that's left keeping this injector number 3 in is a little bit of gravity and friction. So now I'm going to attach the puller tool to the fuel line connection and pull it out. Now, if you're like me and you prefer to use the right tool for the job, this is what the right tool looks like. So you can get injectors out just by pulling on them and pliers and other ways, but yeah, to make sure they come out perfectly vertical, I think it's best to use a puller. So this kit includes what you need to take injectors out and put them back in. So that's to take them out, and that side's to put them back in. I've also added this longer bolt just from a hardware store, the same thread as this. It's just a longer one that allows me to get around the cross brace in the engine bay on a Z4 without having to remove it to get to injector number 6. So also, if you're doing this job, you're going to want new injector seals, part number there, as well as injector decouplers with a part number there. Yes, you can, people put them back in and out with reusing these, but ideally cheap insurance, might as well put new ones on when doing the job. It is recommended by BMW to do that. So the puller, we're going to need the hammer, or the slide hammer, the bolt, and this attachment here. Assemble the slide hammer like this, and we're going to screw this end on to the fuel inlet on the injector there. I'll do that off camera just to make sure I don't have to leave it with this weight hanging on it, and then we'll pull it out. And with the slide hammer attached, now you just gently knock up, and it doesn't take very much. You try and do it exactly vertical or on the same angle as the injector to pull it out. Just get a few taps and feel it coming up. And there it goes. Carefully pull that out, and there's the injector out. Now we'll connect that up to the little branch line there to test it. My injector number 3 is up here now, connected up, ready to test. And what I've done is put the earth strap lead back on here, just that I prefer to have those sorts of things connected up, especially earth straps. And then I've connected up one of those faulty or dud injectors to that injector number 3. So it's not actually in the hole. There's an empty hole down there, down into the cylinder. It's just connected up to that injector loose, just sitting in there. If you don't connect it up, I think it's all right, but you just get a fault code show up that then you have to clear. So I think it's better to have an injector connected. That'll mean the computer's trying to open and close this injector without any fuel running through it. Doesn't matter, it's a dud injector anyway. Even if it was a good injector, it wouldn't do any damage. So now I'll put the fuse back in and crank the engine a few times, and we'll test this other injector. Fuel system fuse back in, testing injector number 3, and crank the engine. And you get a slightly different noise here, simply because we've got air escaping from cylinder 3, because we've got the injector out and the hole in the top of the cylinder. So I'm going to prepare this injector to go back in. This was one of the ones I tested that passed. To go back into number 3. I could have put number 3 back in, but just to show you the process, we'll put a different injector back in. So old Teflon seal here, new Teflon seal, and a knife. We're going to cut the old Teflon seal off very, very carefully with a sharp knife, being sure that we don't damage the edges where the seal touches. So just very carefully cutting that old Teflon seal off. So I've split the seal with the scalpel, and then we'll just take that off like that. It's gone. And now we need this part here for the new seal. We take a new seal, put over the small end and push it up to the big end. There's a new seal slid on there. There's a concave end here which matches the convex end of the tip, so we hold that against there with one hand, and using the other hand slide the seal across the gap between them into its little slot where it lives. Now there's the new Teflon seal. It's sort of pretty loose on there, as you can see, as it's been stretched a bit. Now we've got to compress it. So we come to the kit. There's 3 stages of compression. I've marked them here with a 1, 2 and 3. So this is the larger of them. So we take that, we slide it over the end, and that compresses it the first stage. That should go on pretty easy. It does. Just let it sit for 10 or 20 seconds, and we'll slide that one off, and we'll go with number 2. Now, I sometimes apply just a little bit of like lithium style grease, like a very light inert type of grease just on there, just to help this tool slide on so it doesn't damage the Teflon steel, mark the Teflon seal as it goes on. But we'll be ready with that one. Slide that off, and we'll go on with number 2. Oh, that's a bit harder. There we go. And we'll leave that one in place for another 10 or 20 seconds. Actually, this one might pay to leave a bit longer, maybe 30 seconds or a minute. And then we do the same with number 3, and this one has already got a bit of light high temperature grease in there, so that will help that one slide on. So we'll do that off camera, and voila, number 2 off, number 3 on, so that's compressing it a lot of the way. Now, some people find that they can use a cap off a pen. I think it's the blue Bic style pens with a blue sort of tapered cap, that apparently that does the same job of compressing this seal. You wedge one of those on, and it compresses the seal. So we'll put that away, and we'll leave this for a few minutes just to compress the seal. And in case you've bought new injectors that you're installing, this is what a new one looks like. So while we're waiting for that to compress a bit, this is how the new ones come. So a little dust cap on that end, and they come with this sleeve that is compressing the Teflon seal here. So you only take that aluminium sleeve off the end here right before you're going to install it, just like I'm going to take that off just before I install it. So that's how the new injector comes. It doesn't have a decoupler on it, so in the case of this one, if you're going to install it, you can put the coupler on. It'll slide over the top of that and go on. I probably should have put my decoupler on first. I'll probably quickly take that off, slide the decoupler on and put that back on. So these decouplers, how they work, you should put a new one on each time. Yes, some people say you can reuse them. Of course you can sometimes, but who wants to take that risk? So that's what they look like. Just make sure the tabs aren't all bent over, and that goes on like so, and slides up and into place there and locks into the grooves there. Not going to put that one on just yet, but that's what I'll do on my second-hand one here that I'm going to be installing. Slid that compression piece off, put my decoupler on, and it just slides up, goes in there. Yeah, it's still a bit loose on there, but that's how they sit. And this should be just about compressed now, ready to go. I've prepared to install the new one by taking that earth strap off again and removing the temporary old injector I had parked in there. So now I've got a clear look down to the borehole there. There's nothing that's fallen down there, so we're good to go. So I'll take our second-hand injector we're going to install. Now, I need to note these 6 digits, 2 lines of 3 digits, so 579233. make a note of that. It's a bit easier to do it now than when they go in, because we're going to need those numbers to code this injector in. Now this is a -05 injector, which is matching all of my injectors that I have installed. It's going to be hard to see the numbers, but I've got -05s. The newest injectors are -12. Now, there is a general principle that BMW published that you can mix injectors as long as they're in the same bank. So these three here in bank 1, cylinders 1, 2 and 3, can be one series of injector, -05 for example, and then I could fit -07s or 12s to the second bank, cylinders 4, 5 and 6. So as long as the series of the injectors matches on each bank, within the bank. Now, I've spoken to some leading N54 tuners, and they've all told me that it's quite possible to mix and match injector series. So there isn't actually, as long as you've got that coded number, the calibration number, you can put a 5 in here and a 7 in there and a 10 at the other end if you want. But if you do want to follow the general BMW principles, then you match the series in each bank. So you don't have to have all 5s or all 12s, but as long as each bank has the same. So this injector is ready to go in. Made sure everything's clear to place it in, put it in. New decoupler on, and so now I'll try and do this one-handed. Slide this off. There we go, and you've got a short amount of time to get it into place. So it goes in that way. I'm going to carefully slide it down in there. Trying to keep it vertical, and then just push it down into place. Now, if it doesn't want to go, take it out like I'm going to do now and put that compression tool back on. Now, I was a bit slow then. I'm going to do it again off camera, but that's what you need to do. There's a little locator tab on the bottom. So the fuel connection is on the right, towards the front of the car. Use the front of the car, and the electrical connection on the left. Okay, that was a lot easier. So I just put the compression tool back on for another 30 seconds or so, then took it off and very quickly slid that down into place and just pushed on the center of the top there, so it goes down squarely, and the little tab down there where my finger's pointing slid into place, and now it's seated properly. So it can't just rotate, just do a few degrees there. But now we can put the little cross plate back in there with its center screw to hold that injector in place. Okay. This is the plate that holds them in. And you'll see that it's concave or convex depending on which hemisphere you're from. Yeah, that'll go in that side up. So the high point there, you can see the marks where the bolt head was. That's the top there. So that'll go in like that. Oh, there you go. I've even labelled it 3 and 4 from once before. So that'll go. Now this is the bracket for injector 1 and 2, but just a little trick on how to get these in. So convex side, face it that way. So that's the front of the engine there. Face it that way and drop it, and just drop it in so that the hole is roughly in line. Then get a screwdriver down under there and just carefully flick it up, and there you go, it's all lined up and in place. Hold the screwdriver there while you put the bolt in. That retention plate is sitting in position, a screwdriver here just holding it there, and the hole's lined up. Now I'll put the bolt through. Now, it's perfectly fine to reuse these bolts that hold these in. They're metal bolts into an aluminium, and they're not torqued to yield. But as you tighten it up, you'll feel then the tension of the concave or the metal flexing as it pushes flat. But you do not want to over tighten these, because it'll be a nightmare if you snap them or strip the thread. So set this to 13 Newton meters here for the tension. So it's 13 Newton meters plus or minus 2 Newton meters. So we'll set that. You'll need to do the conversion to foot pounds or inch pounds if you use that system. It's tension to 13 Newton meters. I'll put my little earth lead back on here, attach that. We've got the connector now, and it'll slide down there. So sort of like a little little catch there on that side. That goes against the catch side, so that flat side, ignore the pink paint, that's mine. That'll go in like that and clip down into position. And that's all back together. Now we need the fuel line. So we'll loosen that off, take that off and put that back on to connect it to the injector. Fuel line here, just get both ends started by hand before you put a spanner on it, just to make sure everything lines up properly. You should be able to do it most of the way by hand. There we go, and then just a little bit at the end. It's left-handed. There we go. Now, when tightening this one up on the injector, you do not want to bend the injector in the hole. So I'm going to do this off camera so that I can carefully try and hold the top of the injector and make sure I don't apply any torsional twist and bend the injector in the hole. Now, if you took your spark plugs and coils out and put them back in, tighten your spark plugs to 25 Newton meters. I didn't take them out, I just disconnected the coils. So now go along, pull these up, slide that in, latch it down, just reconnect up all the coils. So before you tighten up any of these injector lines, make sure your retaining plate is in place and torqued down to help hold the injector there. And when you tighten these up, always tighten on the rail side first, because that way this pipe and the plate down the bottom help to hold the injector in place while you tighten this one up. And you want to be careful not to push the injector sideways when you're tightening this one up. Be very, very careful on it. And in case you're wondering, all of these supply lines to the injectors from the high pressure rail are all the same for cylinders or injectors 1 through 5, but number 6 has a different shape. So that's number 5, same as all the others. That's number 6. I'd say it pays to mark them, put them back in the same spot anyway, but number 6 has a different shape to route around the PCV setup. Now I'm in the car with the ignition on, obviously not running, haven't tried to start it, just the ignition on, and we're going to use the Pro Tool app to set the code for the injector. So connect up with this. E89 for me. And in the Pro Tool app we come into Engine, Functions, Injector Coding, and we go into Injector 3 and we're going to change the value there for that injector. So come in here and it was 579233. Try and do that. 579233. That was the code. We hit confirm. Comes up with a little message, code injector with that, yes, code, and another little message saying the last 2 digits may be different due to DME adjustments. This behavior is normal, so we may not expect to see it stay as 579233. So we'll close that. Oops. And it's saved it as 579231, so slightly different. But it is very important to code the injectors. If you don't code the injectors in, it's a calibration factor, so you risk running the wrong amount of fuel into the cylinder, which could be catastrophic, and at the very least it's going to cost you money in fuel. At the very worst, it will cost you a whole new engine. Put your fuse back in if you still have it out, and then we're going to start the car. I'm just getting a bit clearer there. Started first go. Now we might run into some engine faults that need to be cleared. Well, brake pads, that's nothing to do with it. But we might have some fault codes. We'll need to run the car a little bit, just for a few minutes, a minute or so, and then check for fault codes using Pro Tools or MHD or a scan tool. Because it is likely that you'll have a fault code or a shadow code for a low high pressure fuel pump. So just low pressure on that side from the cranking that we did. So you just have to clear that code. Engine's running. As it turns out, I didn't have any fault codes, but worth checking and clear them if you do. And now just check for leaks. So the lines are disconnected, there's no fuel leaks going on. Put your vanity cover back on if you want, and put your air cleaner back in place, and that's the end. Thank you very much.